welcome to Let's Talk About Books, baby, where we talk with your favorite LGBTQ authors. This is Anita Kelly, and my guest today is Sam Ledel. Hi, Sam.
Hi,
How are you?
I am doing so well. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for putting up with all my technical difficulties this evening.
Not a problem.
You're very patient. Uh, so Sam, let's talk about books,
All right.
and let's talk about your books. So, you had one of your most recent releases came out in this past July, and that was called Worth a Fortune. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And so, can you tell us about Worth a Fortune?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Worth a Fortune is a post World War II reunion romance. It follows two women, Harriet Browning and Ava Clark. Harriet is a lumber heiress experiencing hard times due to a couple of things: the shift in the timber industry at the time, as well as the shrinking of the American aristocracy after two world wars. So she discovers her financial situation is actually pretty bad, so worse than she thought. And that kind of ends up turning her into a bit of a recluse. She feels kind of adrift and she retreats into herself and to her Fifth Avenue apartment. Meanwhile, Ava, she has been working for the war effort, but now that the war is over, she's without a job. And she's definitely experienced some hard times over the years, but she's pretty reluctant to admit just how kind of down and out she really is. So Harriet and Ava, they were college lovers, but Harriet broke things off the day of their graduation. She bowed to convention and married a wealthy man following her parents' orders, essentially, leaving Ava brokenhearted and unable to kind of understand how somebody like Harriet, who has the world at her fingertips, could not just do whatever she wanted. So 15 years pass. Harriet begins to grow pretty desperate in her financial situation, so she decides to hire a personal secretary to kind of take care of day-to-day things so she can sort out her financial situation. And the last thing she expects is for Ava to be one of the women showing up for the job.
How about that? And that's how they reconnect, huh?
Yep, that's it.
Wow. So I'm hearing more or less this is an historical romance.
Yes, that's correct. It takes place in the 1940s.
Wow, great. So did you have to do a lot of research because it's set back in time?
Yes, I definitely did. Fortunately, I'm a person who does quite enjoy the research aspect of writing historical fiction. So I got to kind of nerd out for a while. But I definitely had to do a lot of research. I know kind of the generic things about New York, even New York in the 40s, but I'm from Texas originally, so I'm not that experienced when it comes to anything really north of Oklahoma. Um, so I visited once as a kid, but that was it. So yeah, I had to definitely do my research. I did a lot of research on the train system, on the neighborhoods. I had all the maps out and everything, making sure I understood where the characters were traveling. And I even found an old layout of an old apartment on Fifth Avenue, which was the model I used for Harriet's apartment.
Oh, that's so cool. Where'd you find that?
I wish I could remember the site, but it was, just somewhere online. I was able to find a bunch of old layouts that were just really great. So I printed one out and kind of shifted some rooms around a little bit, but that was Harriet's home for the book.
Wow, that is really cool. That's great. So, your most of your research then was done online. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I'd say most of it was online. I do go to the library from time to time and try to see what I can find there,
Hmm.
my local library. But a lot of research ends up being done online or just reading other books written in that time period, either written about it or during that specific time period.
Okay. So, did you have to go back and look at like languages, and you know, clothing styles and um,
Yeah,
pop
that part.
culture.
Definitely. I knew a little bit of pop culture and like the clothing and the dialogue a little. Granted, it's, the classic movie dialogue that I'm familiar with. I'm a big classic movie fan.
That probably
So
helped.
it did, yeah, it kind of helped to have at least an idea of how the wealthier people in the story would speak, and that kind of quick wit that they all seem to have in those movies. I got to kind of pull a little bit from that for some of the characters. And yeah, I got to dive into some attire, look up some old recipes and music. It was really fun to do that research.
Oh, that is fun. I didn't even think about that. So would that be like the swing era, a big
Um,
band era?
yeah, kind of around there. Yeah, I think like Bing Crosby and all of that.
Ah, the crooners. Okay, and oh, that's really cool. So, what can you name a movie that would like depict that era?
Oh gosh.
I'm
Of
putting
course
you
I
on
say that,
I'm putting
and
you
I'm
on the
gonna
spot
get
here. Yeah,
get my
that's all right.
decades wrong. I think of like any Cary Grant film, like His Girl Friday.
Okay, love that.
Um,
Love that.
yeah, that's probably one of my. I think that one just makes the cut. I think it's 1940.
Okay, all right.
um,
That's so cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
lots of Cary Grant, Rosalind Russell,
Okay.
even like Frank Sinatra. He's a little bit later, I think.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
all of
Mm.
those guys. I'll
Okay.
stop myself before I get carried
Okay.
away.
All right. That's so cool. So, you know, watching classic movies helped you kind of probably pick and choose what you wanted to include in here, right?
It did.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. That's great. And has your book been well received?
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I was fortunate enough to get a write up in Publishers Weekly about it, which was really cool.
Wow. That is really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, it was completely unexpected. And my publisher, Bold Strokes, they sent me an email and they were like, "Hey, have you seen this?" And
Mhm.
I said, "Nope, sure haven't." And so they sent me that, and they were actually really great. They even sent me a printout of like the physical, like magazine page,
Oh,
um,
that's so
that
nice.
yeah, that had that in there. So that was really great. And yeah, I mean, I think I tried to do that time period justice. I know I'm not going to get everything right about it, but I did my best to, to do justice to 1940s New York.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's great. So, then Sam, you have coming out, I think later this year, you
Mhm.
have another novel that is actually available for pre-order on the BSB website. Um,
Yes.
I saw that, and that is called Heart of Stone.
Hmm.
Okay, can you tell us about that?
Yes, definitely. So Heart of Stone, very different than Worth of Fortune. Heart of Stone is in the fantasy genre, and
Ah,
it's a spin-off kind of from the Odium trilogy, which is my fantasy adventure series that I've written. So it takes place in the same world. The In book two of the Odium trilogy, I actually introduced two characters. They're twins, and they were super fun to write. And I actually got a lot of positive feedback on them, considering how minor of a characters that they were in that book. They really just kind of pop in and pop out, but people seem to really take to them. And I actually had every intention of putting them in book three of this series, but unfortunately, they just didn't work out that way. There was no room for them. But I had those two characters in the back of my mind ever since. And when I was toying with the idea of kind of redoing the Gorgon myth, I decided that that could be a good way to bring in those two characters into that story. So Heart of Stone kind of looks at a couple things. It looks at the Gorgon myth. It kind of asks the question of like what makes that a myth, what perpetuates it, why do some myths become kind of fearsome and terrible, like Medusa and the Gorgon women?
mm-hmm.
Not to mention, why is it always women who are, terrorizing people of the world?
Because
And
people are
so,
afraid of women, and they should
yeah.
be.
They're There we go. Exactly. Um, yeah. So one of the main characters is a Gorgon. Her name is Maeve, and she lives alone. She has ever since her mother left when she was young for some mysterious reason that you might have to read to find out why.
Okay.
And she is kind of, I mean, she's a product of isolation show. So her social skills are a little stunted. This was my quarantine story.
There you
I,
go.
pro- I promise it's exciting, but it is, it does have a character who has just kind of been isolated for a really long time.
Hmm.
And so she ends up meeting Kiva, who was one of those twins I mentioned before, and she's the princess, and her life is the exact opposite. She's going to festivals, she's running meetings, um, she's partaking in physical contests. Her life is a life of luxury. So I was kind of interested to see what happens when two people from those very different worlds meet one another. And of course, along the way, it is an adventure story and a fantasy story. So Kiva is trying to keep her mother on the throne because she's dying. So she's trying to find a way to keep her on the throne, whereas Maeve is dealing with some lies that have kind of kept her in her life of isolation. So what happens when these two people meet, and what happens as they kind of try to navigate their stories side by side.
Wow. And it sounds like maybe Tiva is more of an extrovert and Maeve is this introvert.
Yes,
Okay.
definitely.
So another thing going on there. And
hmm
you mentioned is it the Odium? Was it Odium?
Yes, the Odium trilogy.
Trilogy. So that is another set of books that you have published with BSP, correct?
Yes, it is. It's
Okay.
a fantasy adventure series that has a romance wrapped up inside of an epic journey. Um, I actually pulled a lot from Irish and Gaelic mythologies for that trilogy in terms of world building.
Cool.
And it's the romance is between a princess, so you can sense a theme between my fantasy books. There's a princess, and then there's somebody who is not a princess that they fall for. And In the Odium trilogy, it's the princess, and then it's a social outcast who actually despises the royal family. So a bit of enemies to lovers in that one. Um,
Nice.
and yeah, and it's just a lot of fun. There's elemental magic. There's a variety of mythological creatures from hedge witches to selkies, pukas, and of course there's an evil villain that has to be defeated. So that one was a lot of fun to write.
Cool. I have no idea what you're talking about when you say pukas and vilas. Is that like something that you would usually see in a fantasy novel?
Perhaps, I've only read maybe one other story where a puka did show up, but when I have a ton of books that I just kind of thumb through when I'm kind of low on the creativity well, and I want an interesting character, interesting creature, and the puka showed up one day, and it's this, in my opinion, mildly terrifying giant bat dragon combo.
Ah.
Um, and sort of like, I guess, like a werewolf meets a bat would be a better description.
Wow. Yeah, it
Yeah,
doesn't sound like someone you'd want to bring home to dinner.
yeah. So it's just kind of fun to take these creatures that have been around in stories for a while and see if I can kind of tweak them a little bit for my story.
Okay. Great. That's fun. So, do you have a background in mythology?
I wish I could say yes to that. If by background you mean just a lifelong interest, then yes.
Okay. All right. But no
Yeah,
formal education in it?
I took some classes in college. I was a creative writing major, and I was able to take some courses in mythology. And they were great. They were really interesting. I have a passion for it, so I usually am always reading about it if I'm not writing about it.
So, you are a reader then.
Yes, I am.
And are you currently reading anything good?
I finally have been able to get some reading done. I struggle to read when I'm writing.
Yeah, I can
Um,
understand that. Yeah.
and at the end of 2022, I read a story. Um, it was called In an Instant, which weirdly was not fantastical. It was a contemporary fiction, but it had been a while since I'd read a book that had kept me on the edge of my seat. But this one did. It's about a really tragic car accident that two families get into, and it looks at kind of everybody's true face in an instant of trauma or terrible circumstances. How those instances really reveal a lot about who we are,
Yeah.
and the decisions that we're willing to make in really dire situations. And that book did just, in my opinion, a really good job of taking a magnifying glass to that and seeing people's true colors in those situations.
Wow.
Um, and so that
Sounds
one was really great.
intense. Yeah.
It was intense. Yeah, it was a page turner. And right now I'm reading Alone by E.J. Noyes. I'm going to say that wrong. Um, uh, Bellow Books author.
Okay.
But it's really good. I love it so far.
Okay. Good. Great. Yeah. I'm not familiar with EJ, but and so I couldn't tell you. We'll say you pronounced the name correctly.
Okay.
But when you say In an Instant, I just saw a movie preview for something that sounds like that. Uh,
Oh, interesting.
yeah. Who was in it? Boy, it looked really good. It's coming out soon.
Hmm.
Um, and it's is it Natalie Pugh? It might be. Um, and she is in an accident, and her family is affected, and so is her fiance's family, and it's just about everything that happens between them.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it looks really really good, really intense. Has I can't remember who it was now, but I remember thinking, wow, that's a great cast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely sounds similar to that book too. I wonder if they're connected in any way.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I wonder. Oftentimes, great movies are taken from great books. So,
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Oh, cool. Um, so your Odium trilogy
Hmm.
um, is not really connected to Heart of Stone, but we do see some recurring characters.
Yes, you'll see the two twins from book two, and there may or may not be a few cameos from the characters in the trilogy, but
Awesome.
people will have to read to find out.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. So it really sounds like you cross over genres, like from you have a historical fiction and
Hmm.
these other fantasy romances, and um, of course they're all romance novels. But what do
Hmm.
you find is your favorite in which to write and work?
Hmm. I have been thinking about that a lot, and I still don't have a definite answer, I'm
Okay.
afraid. I think I love both for different reasons.
Well, tell us about
Fantasy,
that. Yeah.
sure, yeah, fantasy, for me, it's wonderful because it's fantasy. I get to make things up, which is mostly really fun
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes extremely difficult. I definitely realize the limits of my imagination with fantasy. I take the time to build this world and realize, oh, now I need to make the rules for this world.
Yeah, but
um,
just building a world, you must have one heck of a great imagination. So kudos to
ah,
you.
oh, thank you. I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've always been drawn to fantasy as a genre for its escapism, but also for its ability to use these fantastical, magical elements and worlds and people to tell stories that are relevant to the world that we do live in. And I feel like fantasy does a good job of making difficult themes more palatable, more digestible in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and can be a really good tool for teaching really important lessons, but in a sort of it's almost cloaked, if you will. Like it's not necessarily obvious, but it has a way of kind of getting in and making you look at things in a way that you might not if it was given to you in the form that you're familiar with in the everyday.
That makes sense.
Um,
Yeah.
and also growing up, fantasy just equaled different, and I always felt a little bit different, so I was drawn to it from the get-go.
Okay. Yeah.
And
And so
yeah, and then
what about like history? Do you like history? Um
yeah,
yeah.
I love history. Like I think I mentioned earlier, I love research. I was a history minor, so I've also just always been into just learning about the past.
Okay.
I
What's
like
your
to try
favorite
to,
era?
oh gosh, favorite era. Um, that's a good question.
All of
um,
them.
all of them. I like them all for different reasons. I don't know if I'd really want to be a woman before a certain time period, but
Yes,
um,
yes.
but I appreciate all of them for the different things that were created or blossomed out of them,
Yeah.
for the most part. Yeah, and I like trying to understand how people lived and what influenced changes in society over time. And when it comes to sapphic fiction, what I write, I almost approach my historical romances with an altered lens. My editor actually once commented that my stories sound almost like alternative history, and maybe they are to an extent.
Oh, wow.
Um, I understand, of course, the reality of what it meant to be queer or LGBTQ plus, 150, even 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And I also know that queer folks have existed for even longer than that. So with
Mhm.
my historical romances, I kind of want to provide a beacon of light in times that were generally quite dark for queer people. I mean, we've probably seen a lot of the sapphic movies that come out. They're dark, they're muted, they're forbidden tales. And I get that. I understand the reality behind those films and those stories. But I also think there should be some balance. I think we deserve some balance. And so some people might say aspects of my historical romances are unrealistic, like Harriet's sister-in-law, for example, in Worth of Fortune. She doesn't really bat an eye at her and Ava's romantic history. Is that historically accurate? Maybe not. But
Who knows?
who's to say some kind-hearted souls didn't exist in 1940s New York? So perhaps it's a bit optimistic, even unrealistic of me, but I want to write stories for people who love historical fiction and sapphic romance and want to see those two things combined in a way that leads to a happily ever after well before the invention of the internet.
Yeah. And I have to believe that there were those folks out there. I mean, we
Hmm.
wouldn't have gotten where we are today without allies.
Yes.
So there had to be. There absolutely
Yeah.
had to be.
I like to think so.
Yeah. Um so when you go about writing, whether it's historical fiction or fantasy, do you plot things out and outline or do you just kind of figure it out as you go along? And has this process changed for you as you developed your writing skills?
Yeah, I would say to answer the second part first, yes, it has absolutely changed since I first started writing. A long time ago on a panel I did with Bold Strokes, I joked about how my first novel writing experience felt like parts of that Beautiful Mind movie. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes, yes, yes.
Where there were just words floating everywhere. There was pages taped to my wall. There were random scribbles on every surface of my room. It was chaos, to say the least.
And what
There
did you
was
do with those random scribbles? Just throw them all together?
I somehow did. I wrote that book, my first book, completely out of order. It was a bunch of random scenes that I somehow miraculously, with the help of my editor, managed to find kind of like a through line and find the plot and the pace and everything like that. I knew
Mhm.
what I wanted to do, but I was a newbie and I didn't really know how to organize it all. So I have definitely evolved since then. I've become more of a plotter. I was a bit of a pantser
Okay.
in the beginning. And I've mostly have become more of a plotter thanks to the trilogy, because I had to plan that. There was really not a lot of wiggle room when it comes to writing 3 books in a series that have to have a plot carryover from book 1 all the way to book 3.
Yeah, I
So that
imagine
actually,
that takes a lot more work and thought
yeah,
than
yeah.
just kind of sitting down and winging it.
Yes, yeah, I couldn't get away with winging it, even if I wanted to do that. um, I was told I should probably try not to do that. But I'm really grateful for the feedback on the trilogy because it really did help me structure things a bit more. I still don't consider myself a plotter. Like with my latest books, with my historical romances, there was a bit more structure, but I'm not somebody who relies on like hitting a certain quota or mapping out each chapter. I kind of have highlights or beats that I know I want or need to hit within a story,
Yep.
but what happens in between those is kind of up in the air until I'm writing it.
Okay. All right. That's good. That sounds like a good compromise.
Yeah, I think so.
Uh, so, your your work so far, right? It seems like um the Odium and Heart of Stone are more future oriented, would you say? Or
Um,
just otherworld
yeah,
oriented?
yeah, I guess it could be the future. Otherworld oriented might be, yeah, probably the better fit, I think.
Okay.
Hmm.
And then Worth a Fortune is past oriented. So
Hmm.
I'm wondering if you have ever written just a contemporary novel, or if you have ever considered writing a contemporary novel.
Yes, and I have actually. My first novel, the one that was complete chaos before it was finished, that is called Rocks and Stars, and that is a contemporary coming of age story.
It's called Rocks and Stars.
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
And is that published with Bold Strokes also?
It is. It is published with Bold Strokes. Yep, that was the one that I was fortunate enough to kind of help me get my foot in the door through all of this.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. All right, great. We'll have to check that one out. I didn't
Yeah.
I missed that one.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, it's I think it came out in 2018 or 2019. I don't remember now, but yeah, that was the first one. It's near and dear to my heart for the fact that it was my first one. So that one will always be special for me.
Oh, okay. So, is that your most favorite novel, you think?
Um, it's not my favorite.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
It's
but it
just your
is.
most near and dear.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. So what is your favorite? Which one's been your favorite to write?
So my favorite novel is actually Wildflower Words.
Ah,
Um, and there's, I guess, a couple reasons for it. The first is that the characters and the setting came really quickly and really easily to me, which was really nice. And it has like a sweet kind of cozy feeling for me. And I felt that the entire time I was writing the story. And I think the biggest reason it's my favorite is because of where I was in life when I was writing it. I was about halfway through the first draft when the long term relationship I was in ended. And as happens sometimes with breakups, life felt completely upside down.
yeah.
I felt pretty lost, and for lack of a better word, kind of was just feeling just adrift.
Yeah.
And
Understandable.
um, yeah, and so I even, I did the whole dramatic uprooting of my life. I moved back home for a while. My life was kind of like a movie, but in the worst of ways. And I'm somebody who believes everything happens for a reason, and of course that turned out to be a blessing in disguise. But in regards to the story, I when I was writing that at that point, I was certain there was no way I could finish it. I was full on believing love was a lie. There was no happiness in the world. Everything was dark and gloomy. Um, but the story didn't let me go. And Wildflower Words ultimately is a story of hope in dark times. And I ended up kind of clinging to that hope and managed to give the characters the story that they deserved, which was a happy ending despite the circumstances and the times. So for that, it's my favorite.
Oh, that's so nice. That's great. That's great. And that was published in January of last year, right?
Yes.
And so you wrote that during the pandemic, or
I did. Yes,
yeah,
that was
okay.
during the pandemic.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So it takes a while between when it actually gets published and you're writing, and it takes about
hmm
it's like almost a year's process, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. About a year.
So you have had what, like, well, six books published already.
Yes, that's correct.
That's awesome. That's a short amount of time, really.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, awful as the pandemic has been and is, I it did provide me with more time,
Yeah.
um, which I was fortunate enough to be in the right headspace to be able to utilize that time.
Yeah.
So that that kind of helped.
Yeah. So what keeps you writing, and what do you enjoy about it?
Oh, good question. I feel like everything. I enjoy everything about writing.
No,
um,
no, no. You can't say that.
okay, I don't enjoy, I guess, having to, um, like, the point sometimes where you reach where you know the ideas are in your brain somewhere, but you have to really kind of sift through everything and tear them out.
Mhm.
That part can feel really arduous, and
Let's
makes me kind of. I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say it's less creative. It's kind of breaking up the creative flow.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that part I don't really care for. It makes me want to kind of just bang my head against the computer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
but for the most part, I truly love writing. I've loved it for so long, and the one thing that hasn't really changed about writing that I love is how cathartic it is. Um, writing has always been my outlet. I've always expressed myself better in writing. When my thoughts are jumbled or when I'm overwhelmed, when something is kind of just stuck inside of me, I always turn to pen and paper. And I'm going to date myself with this song lyric reference. um, but I think it's an Anna Nolik song. I don't even know if I said her name right, but she has a lyric that says, "If I get it all down on paper, it's no longer inside of me, threatening the life it belongs to." I feel like that is exactly what it is for me. Um,
That's what
so
journaling's all about.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So no matter what form it takes, I feel like I always am writing in some form or fashion, and that's a big part of what keeps me going when it comes to writing. In regards to my novels, as long as the ideas keep coming to me, I'm going to try to put them down on paper.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Um, so, all right, Sam, we're going to play truth or dare.
Okay.
Tell us one thing that no one knows about you.
Oh
And it can be
gosh.
related to writing, it can be related to you personally.
Well, I was going to share something, I guess, less exciting, but the truth or dare thing makes me want to think about that a little more. Um, I mean, nobody. I was thinking more people who read my books might not know I was in the Peace Corps.
Cool.
Um,
When were you in the Peace Corps?
I was in the Peace Corps from 2014 to 2016.
Great. And where were you stationed?
I was stationed in southern Peru in a town called Ica, which is about 4 hours southeast of Lima.
Oh, wow. That's so
hmm
cool.
Yeah, it
Did you
was.
like that?
Oh, yes, it was one of, if not the best experience of my entire life.
Oh, good for you. That's great. So,
Yeah, it was a really fun time.
it sounds like, yeah, I had a friend who was in the Peace Corps. He wasn't that lucky. He ended up um uh having nutritional problems. He wasn't
hmm
getting enough nutrition where he was. So he actually had to leave and come back
Oh,
home.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty common. I'd say probably a third of my group that I went with had to be medically um, evacuated is an extreme word, but had to leave the country due to health reasons.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Hmm.
understandable.
Yeah,
We don't know how lucky we are, right?
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Sam, do you have any parting words for our listeners today?
Um, I guess if I don't know any readers or writers are out there listening, I'm somebody who always enjoys recommendations. So if you have recommendations on books, send them my way. I was trying to think of something motivational to share. So I guess if you're a writer, I think this is advice that has probably gone around the gamut a few times, but I think it's worth saying still that if it's something you want to do, if you're talking about doing it, thinking about doing it, just take a deep breath and do it. Jump in, sit in the chair, do whatever it is you're wanting to do, and just go for it and believe in yourself.
Great, great words of wisdom. Really,
Uh,
yeah, believe in yourself for sure.
mhm.
So, if someone wanted to send book recommendations to you, where would they send that to?
People can find me on social media. I try to be better about social media than I have been in the past.
Okay.
But I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and my website, samledel.com. You can find my email on there as well.
Okay. All right. Great. So, if you listeners would like to contact Sam, send her any book recommendations that you might have. You can contact her on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or samledel.com. Is that it? Samledel.com?
That's it.
Okay, awesome. Well, Sam, it has been such a pleasure talking with you, and thank you so much for being on the show today. Um, that is all the time we have. I'm Anita Kelly, and thanks, listeners, for joining Liz talk about books, baby. Until next time, may your journey be lighthearted, peace be plenty, and be safe, folks.